Today we're talking retirement income planning, one of our favorite topics. Had a great conversation with a 61-year-old federal employee living overseas. He said, why don't you make a video about our situation? Their big goal is transitioning to retirement in the next 4 years. So here we go. We're going to continue our conversation as well, but I think this serves as a great example if you're looking to transition to retirement within the next 5 years or so. So a little bit of background here. 61-year-old federal employee living overseas for a while. His wife's turning 59 in December. She's currently not working. They want to come back to the States probably next year. They want to retire in 2028 when he turns 65. Part of the plan here I think is interesting that they're coming back to the States. They want to get some locality pay increases so they can pad the FERS annuity calculations just a little bit, right? Make those a little bit higher, which I love. And then there's some big questions around retiring. When is the right time? How much income are they going to have? What do their expenses look like? How are they going to create the income that they need if there's a shortfall between those guaranteed income sources like the FERS pension, Social Security, and what they need from an expense standpoint. So we're going to dig into all those questions today. So it's going to be an interesting video. So stay with me towards the end. We're also going to talk about some things and some considerations you may want to build into the plan. But first, guys, my name is Justin. I'm a financial advisor. I've been doing this for a long time, part of Federal Family myself, and we help federal employees build custom financial plans, manage their investments, just make smart financial decisions. So if you're working on something, we'd love to hear from you and be a resource for you. All right, so as we mentioned, our guy's 61, turning 61 in December, wife's turning 59. What I want to do first here is take a look at the balance sheet to give you a little bit more context, okay? So as I mentioned, they've been living overseas, but their balance sheet looks great, okay? So here's how it currently stands. And this is important because the balance sheet, the assets are going to need to generate income if there's any shortfall between the guaranteed income sources that we're going to get to and his retirement expenses. So on that balance sheet, looks good. They've got $150,000 in savings, $220,000 in home equity from a house they own overseas. They're planning to sell that. It's going to be dumped back into the financial plan somewhere. Not sure if we're going to use that to generate income or not. Then he's also got some home equity in a house he owns in the Pacific Northwest. About $250,000 is our estimate there. Okay. In addition to that, there's $1.2 million in a pre-tax TSP. So that's the biggest asset on the balance sheet. So all totaled up about $1.8 million in assets. The balance sheet looks great. All right. And so that's what we're going to use to be able to generate some income down the road. All right. And we're also going to talk about legacy planning, some of those things too, and how that plays into what's going on here on his balance sheet, on their balance sheet. So next on our list, let's talk retirement income. First of all, let's back up and think about this locality pay thing. So they're living overseas and the pay where they're at currently isn't quite as good as some of the locality pays on the West Coast, which is where they're thinking about coming back and finding a landing spot, which I think is a wonderful idea. I love this. If you can land in a spot that has a higher pay rate, you can pad those last couple years, get your high 3 a little bit, an increase to the high 3, and then your FERS annuity comes out higher. Okay. So coming back to the West Coast, we're going to just take a guess and say maybe they land in San Diego. I love San Diego, great city. Could be a good landing spot for them. He's currently a GS-12 step 10. And he's got 38 years of service. By the time he wants to retire at 65 in 2028, he'll have 42 years of service. Currently, the GS-12 Step 10 in San Diego makes $128,752 a year. Okay, so that's a little bit of an increase from what he's making now. That number is going to be our starting point. So what I want to do is, we'll take that, assume he comes back next year, lands a job there. I want to increase that number for inflation, for pay raises. And we're going to build in 2.5% a year, which I don't know if that's right or not, but I think it's a pretty reasonable guess. So by the end of the 4-year period, he comes back, gets this job. His high 3 is going to be increased. 138,680 is what he's going to come out to have as a high 3, indexing that 128,752 at 2.5% over the next 4 years. Okay, so 138,680 is going to be his high 3. And of course, the last 3 years of salary are going to be his highest 3 years of salary, which is great. So 138,680 times 42 years of service times 1.1%. He's over age 62, so he's eligible for that 1.1% multiplier. He's going to have a gross annuity of $64,070 a year. So that's a wonderful benefit, right? To plug in right away, guaranteed income backed by the federal government, right? One consideration here, that's a gross number. One thing we are going to want to take, we mentioned a non-working spouse, so he's going to want to consider that survivor benefit protection, 10% premium for the insurance policy that your spouse gets a benefit. That takes the annuity down to $57,663. So the reduction there, but well worth it. We have to build this into the plan. It's super important. If something happens, you predecease your spouse, we really need to make sure this is accounted for. Okay. And this is probably the best way for them to do it. Insurance gets a little bit tricky and you can talk through those concepts as well. In the example here, we're going to take the SBP. All right. So that's a gross number for our FERS annuity that we can run with. Of course, we're going to take taxes off this and we're going to account for that in one of our later steps. So we got the FERS annuity locked down. What's next on the list? Social Security, right? He gave me some estimates. They want to take it to 65. I don't know if that's the right decision or not. It's something that needs to continue to be discussed. There are some trade-offs, like we mentioned, a non-working spouse, spousal benefits. She doesn't have enough on her own record, so she's going to claim based on his record. So for the sake of simplicity within this example, he's going to take it at 65. She's going to claim at 63 at the same exact time. And those benefits are going to look like this. $35,831 is what his benefit would be on an annual basis. Her spousal benefit would be $14,470 a year. So those are the gross numbers. Of course, we're gonna have to tax those at their tax rates. So looks good, right? So there's great income sources from the FERS annuity, the 2 Social Security benefits. And then of course, he does have another thing I haven't mentioned, VA disability, $4,000 a month coming in tax-free, powerful benefit there as well. So let's adjust these things for taxes. And there's a couple things to consider here. All right, so again, I'm gonna keep this simple and we're gonna consider tax brackets. All right, so we know the 22% tax bracket in 2025 starts at right around $97,000. It's $96,951. It runs up to $206,700. So $207,000 essentially, right? So that's kind of the range of the 22% bracket. So his guaranteed income sources from the FERS annuity, Social Security, that's gonna fall in the 10 and 12% bracket. It's not gonna hit the 22% bracket yet, okay? So that's favorable, at least when we're talking about taxing these, because the FERS annuity is going to be fully taxable, except for the return of premiums, whatever he gets back there. It's generally like 5% or something. And then Social Security is going to be taxable 85% of that benefit. Okay. So we'll adjust those for taxes, and we'll just, for simplicity, we'll use a 12% rate because most of the money is going to fall in that 12% bracket. I know it's really a blended rate between 10 and 12. So that gives us $48,206 on the FERS basic annuity. It gives us $32,176 on Social Security for him, $12,994 for Social Security for her. And we add back in the $48,000 of VA disability income, and now we've got a grand total of $141,376 a year coming in. Okay, so that's wonderful guaranteed income sources, very powerful stuff. On a monthly basis, that breaks out to be $11,781, and we've accounted for taxes. Those income sources are going to fill up pretty much the 10 and the 12% bracket. You do have the standard deduction that's going to come off, so there's a little bit of wiggle room for just more income to hit at 12% before we jump into 22%, but we're going to keep it simple in this example as we move forward. All right, so next up, let's talk about expenses. He's given me an outline of expenses, which I think is pretty good. So he gave me a spreadsheet. About $12,500 is what he's estimating to spend on a monthly basis. Now, this does include a bit of a cushion for travel experience, fun things, spoiling grandkids, things they really want to do, right? They've worked long and hard. They deserve to have the lifestyle that they want. So I love this number, okay? Now, there's one other thing I think we should add in. There's an additional situation with housing that we want to solve, right? So I mentioned retirement's the big goal, and I forgot to mention a couple other key things. So coming back to the States is a big deal. We're going to figure out housing, figure out where they want to retire after, the next 4 years of working. So that needs to be built into the plan. And there's also a classic car purchase that we can't forget about. I love classic cars. I want to make this happen in the plan and, see him drive a cool car when he's retired and enjoying life. So the housing thing is a little bit of a wild card. And so what I'm going to say is we probably need to build in a mortgage, property taxes, and insurance of maybe $2,500 a month. So at least until we get that sorted out. So $12,500, which is what his guess was on expenses, plus $2,500 puts us right at $15,000 a month. So there's a little bit of a gap there. We mentioned, what do we have? 11,000 and change, almost 12,000 a month from the guaranteed income sources. So there's a little bit of a gap, a delta there. Now, of course, we need to adjust that $12,500 for inflation because we know things are going to get more expensive in the next 4 years. So if we take that at a reasonable rate, we'll say that $12,500 grows up to $13,441. So it gives us, and we'll add back in the $2,500 for mortgage. That gives us a grand total of $15,941. So let's call it $16,000 a month is what we need. And we've got $11,781 coming in. So there's a gap there. How are we going to fill that gap? How are we going to solve that equation? I mentioned at the beginning of the video, that's where the balance sheet comes in, the assets that are there. We need them to produce income. So we're going to have to take a look at that and see what we can do. And for the sake of simplicity in this video, we're going to focus on the TSP, the biggest asset. There are some other opportunities probably to generate income from savings and some other investments, but we're going to focus on this TSP right now, okay? All right, so we know the work that we have to do. So let's say we've got $1.2 million in the TSP account. He's contributing 5%, the agency's contributing 5%. This thing's going to run out for another 4 years. It's currently invested pretty aggressively. So, it's mostly equities, something we probably need to talk about and make sure that's the right mix for them going forward, because right now is one of those pivotal times, less than 5 years, that's a short time horizon. Movements in the market can derail your plans, especially when you're going to be relying on taking income for your lifestyle goals. Okay. So that's something we need to discuss. So the 1.2 million plus the 10%, the 5 from him, 5 from the agency flowing in, and we're going to make a reasonable rate of return at 7%. That grows out to be 1.6 million and change in 4 years. $1,629,964 in 4 years. Okay. So at the end of 2028. Now, if we talk about the 4% rule, which we talk about all the time, probably give it too much press, but it's a good starting point. It's not a rule, it's a strategy, a benchmark for how much money we can take from a portfolio with a safe withdrawal rate. It just gives you a better probability of not outliving your money. You take 4% off of that net or that gross balance, 1.6 million. So you've got 65,198 a year. Okay. So it's a big chunk of change. And over 12, you break that down over 12 months, it's $5,433 a month. So $5,433 a month is the income we're looking at from the TSP. Now, just not so fast, my friend, right? This is pre-tax money. This is a pre-tax TSP. So we're gonna have to account for taxes in this equation. And we just talked about tax rates. So we know they're filling up the 10 and the 12% brackets with the guaranteed income sources. There might be a little bit of wiggle room at the top of that 12% bracket for what's gonna come out of the TSP. For the sake of simplicity, we're gonna assume the majority of the distributions are gonna be taxed at 22%. Okay, so we take 22% off the 5433, and now you're down to 4237 a month, okay? So that's kind of what we could take from the pre-tax TSP if things go according to plan. So is that enough? If we combine that with the 11,781 we said we had in guaranteed income sources, it gets us pretty close, almost to the 16,000 mark exactly that we were talking about the need. So it's pretty close. I think it's a pretty fair estimate too, from talking about how much income we can generate from investments. There's probably more wiggle room, as we mentioned. There's some home equity, some savings that could be built into generating income as well. So they're like right on the line to make this happen, and things look pretty good. So it's exciting. All right, so we created the retirement income worksheet. We see that the income versus expenses look pretty good, even with that deficit from guaranteed income to the expenses he's projecting. We can fill that gap with the assets generating income from TSP and maybe some other assets that are on the balance sheet. Okay, so things look good from that standpoint, but there are some concerns here. Okay, so I think, the survivor benefit is one thing we need to talk about. We probably need to talk about insurance coverages. We're going to need to talk a little bit about estate planning. So titling beneficiaries properly. Is a trust something that might be appropriate in the circumstance? I don't know. It's something we need to talk about, and then just, basic documents, those sort of things that need to kind of be buttoned up here. Probably the biggest risk that I can see is market volatility. Okay, so with less than 4 years, really, until the planned retirement date, it's gonna be really important to button up the investment strategy, okay? Because volatility can derail the plan here if there's a significant correction for whatever reason. I know things look good right now, but we never really know what's kind of brewing under the surface. These things happen unexpectedly. So you wanna take some of that risk off the table and just have structure within your investment plan so that you can, weather that volatility if it does, when and if it does come. I should say when it comes. All right, so I think that's a big deal that really needs to be covered in combination with some of those other financial planning elements that are really important to getting into a successful retirement, transitioning well, okay? So there's a lot more that goes into it than just figuring out what your income looks like versus your expenses. There's a bunch of things you may not even be thinking about, the unknowns. That's what we want to cover here, okay? All right, so to me, I think things look great. I think there's probably even room for that classic car purchase that we want to make. And I don't know. I hope this has been helpful for you, at least to kind of walk through transitioning into retirement, figuring out how much you might have coming in, how much you might need, and where everything is going to fit together, at least from the retirement income worksheet. And then start thinking about those unknowns, those considerations that really need to go into building a successful transition into retirement, okay? So if you found some value here, I would love if you'd like and share, like and subscribe, and share with a friend or a colleague who might find some value as well. And until next time.